Hey Gulpreet, thanks for joining me. We're here on behalf of Network Capital to essentially the peer-to-peer mentoring platform that I've been involved with, and we're here to try and speak about how you got here and what are some of the key career decisions that you've taken. So could you tell us a little bit about what do you do and how did you get here?
So, I now run a public equity fund that focuses on long-term investing into India, and we invest into companies across various sectors. So we're a generalist fund. Most of the money is obviously raised through people that I know, friends and family, and some part of it is my own capital and capital of people who I've worked with before. How I got here was actually, it's a long story. Like 20 years ago when I went to the US, the idea and desire was always to come back to India. I worked, and that's how I joined GE's Financial Management Leadership Program, which is their global program, but I think had tentacles all around the world. And I think it gave me an opportunity to look at businesses. Also, I think somewhere the heart was to be an entrepreneur, in 99-2000 when I was thinking to say, okay, now I've worked in a very large organization, either I have to be abroad or I have to travel a lot, but I think the India angle is getting missed, and also it's going to be hard to live out of the US and try to do something in India. So I took a plunge and joined, I would say, one of the most successful entrepreneurial private equity funds in India called Chrys Capital. And in 99-2000, as most people will realize, that India was really at the nascent stage of pretty much anything that was supposed to be done with technology or anything like that. And I think one of the reasons we succeeded is we made a lot of mistakes actually initially. So I think we fell down, but I think the tenacity to get up and continue to try to do things and make it better were good. Also to admit that we were wrong. Like for example, we invested in a lot of internet companies, but really the PC penetration was so poor in India that it couldn't work. But today with mobile telephony, I think things have changed. So I think the big lesson I would say is, I think, following your dream, but also admitting that you will make mistakes, and then being able to get up and partner with right people.
Gotcha. And you mentioned that this was one of your, like you always had this ardent desire to be in India. So from the time you started and to now, what are some of the key differences you see in the India of then and the India of now? One is of course mobile. What else?
One of the biggest things I think that you see is, I think that you have, I think everybody talks about the young population, which I think is obviously a big asset, but the young population is now very aspirational. I would say 15-20 years ago, they all wanted to do well, but the aspirations were a lot lower. I think the exposure was very different. I think just not mobile, but the advent of, I would say, television, of satellite, of cable, travel. I think people are able to travel across, countries. Education, I think your people are a lot more mobile today, and I think people are going to different parts of the world. Also, I think there are now lots of success stories of Indians who've come back and have done well, and I think people realize that in different fields, whether it's sport, whether it's politics, whether it's business, whether it's venture capital, I think there are real homegrown good stories which were done without any nepotism, without any backing. They were sheer, done out of hard work and obviously passion, and I think there are now hundreds of those stories. So I think there's a big change, I would say, in terms of aspirations.
You're absolutely right. Modern school SRCC. So I'm going to take you back to when you were 18. If you were to give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would that be?
I'm saying something which is not good, but I think the standard of Delhi University is terrible, and I think that's why I think, and I'm biased because I'm a founder at Ashoka, I would give an advice to an 18-year-old getting out of school is to get education which is much more holistic, rather than cramming up and giving one exam, because honestly and I think we all understand in the grand scheme of things it really doesn't make any difference. So I would say that it's better to choose a program, and it could not be just academic, it could be sport, it could be culture, it could be movie, but really go with your passion and try to figure out schools and universities that really give you an overall view of it, which I would say we didn't get it, honestly. I really realized it much later when I started to work and travel and do all of that, but the 3 years of Delhi University, I think I really wasted. And so from that perspective, I would say that today's generation has a lot more options, and I think they need to value that and choose really things which are much more holistic.
Right. What has been the role of mentors in your life?
Significant. You cannot achieve anything without mentorship anywhere in the world. And I would say from a very early stage, I was very lucky that I found some very good mentors, very good people. I would say one of my first mentors in my life has been my mother. I think I've seen her, go through a lot of hardships, but I think she made sure her children got very well educated. I have a very close friend of mine, Puneet Dalmia, who, I went to high school with, and I think he played a role because I saw him, really become a true global business leader, and and do things in the right way. And then later on in life, in the professional world, I had my boss at GE, I had Ashish at Chrys Capital. So I would say you always need people to guide you and help you, because especially when times are tough, and also when times are good, they at least bring you back to the ground and saying that both are not permanent. And I think mentorship is a very essential part of my success.
Thank you. Could you give a couple of instances, if possible, where the mentor sort of defined your path or gave you feedback that really helped you grow?
I would say so. The first thing was, I think without mentorship, I would have not come to India. I think in the 90s, most people went to the US thinking they were coming, and I think I would say at that point, when I spoke to Puneet, he was the guy who introduced me to Ashish at that point, and he said, Gul, I think this might be the right time to come. Maybe the
How
journey
old were
might
you
get.
then?
I was 20. I was 27.
I see.
So really I had hardly spent any time in the US, and for me to take that plunge and really become part of a startup would have been impossible without a mentor really pushing me. And then secondly, now to start Mylen, to do my own business, I think having the courage to do it is, I think people backed me. They said, go with your dream, have the ability to run and own your own business, hire people. And again, I think, so both in terms of, I would say, moving to India and even finally taking a plunge to start, my own business, which is Mylen, I think would have been impossible to do without mentorship.
Yeah. And at 27, that means you would have barely spent time, as you said, and also you wouldn't be financially secure in the traditional sense.
Absolutely not. I actually had very little money in that way. In fact, like nothing. And when I came back, we got paid nothing too. So it was actually a very hard time financially, but a very exciting time professionally. Also, we saw a lot of failure initially. If you look at the history of Chrys Capital, the first 2 years, 2.5 years, very tough. And that's why I tell everybody, I think...
was the internet time?
Yes, internet, all these things going up. It was really when we sold Spectrum and things changed. And that's why I tell everybody, I said, there is no quick road to success. It takes, in my view, at least 4, 5, 6 years to define anything that you do. And people sometimes let it go when things are really tough, but that's the time maybe things are coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agree. I think, financially, I think I was not secure at all at that point.
Moving on, in what ways is your industry changing? I mean, you moved from private equity, now you do a different kind of investing, hedge fund.
Yes, public equity. In India, you can't hedge anyway.
Yeah.
So it's long only.
Right. So how's the industry evolving?
Obviously, I think there are 2 or 3 different things that are happening. See, when I started, or when Chrys Capital started, or when there were really very few forms of capital, there was, I would say, a few of the global multilateral agencies like IFC and World Bank and CDC giving money, and very few homegrown domestic funds, and maybe 1 or 2 of us. Now I think you have the whole spectrum of people. You have the global VCs, you have the global big private equity guys. The public markets have actually, I wouldn't say reasonable depth, but reasonable coverage. So you have all the large, I would say, mutual funds or money managers playing into India, and also you have domestic capital now with LIC, mutual funds, banks, insurance companies, and on the other side you also have, I think, great private capital where people have done very well in the last 10-12 years and are giving back to society in different ways, whether through a venture in the education space, whether in charitable space, but also through startups. Like I have an example where I can give you of a startup that I backed, which I would have never done. A company called Easy Diner. It was done last year. It's a restaurant reservation booking site.
Yes.
It's done with I would say a team which was under the hotels, Veer Sanghavi, and another global fund, and then we've got Silicon Valley Bank to invest in it. And these are all young people, and you could do that. And I think some of us are giving it back now in different ways, Versus, I would say 15, 20 years ago, people just accumulated wealth and said, okay, we really don't want to do it.
Right, right. So that also ties back to the national growth as well as industry growth. And I mean, you don't need to answer this question, but do you think government has been an enabler, or you succeed despite the government?
So see, I think the private investment world is done without the government, but I think to give them credit, at least in the last many years, I think they've at least tried to stay out of it, and I think they're changing. I think they're also causing less disruption, I would say, in our space. Most people, like for example, the tax issues, the ease to do businesses, I think they're all trying to improve some of that, and I think that's right. But
you see some tangible difference on ground?
Yes, you see. I think especially in the international perspective, I think there was a time when India was really, I think, struggling with international reputation. That definitely has improved in the last, I would say, 3 years.
Understood. How are weekends like? What do you do beyond work?
So I have a young daughter who's like 4.5 years old. I was a late father, so I think most of the times is spent, if I'm not traveling, with her, and really.
And it was a conscious decision.
No, it was not a conscious decision. So like they say, you don't get everything in life at the time you want, but luckily we had her, and so I would say it's mostly spending time with family and and my daughter.
And Ashoka, because you're also one of the founders.
I would say that and I'm not saying it. I would say that of late I've been a lot more active, but there are spurts in when it happens and it doesn't. And I think now I'm actually starting to formally spend a lot more time. But I agree with you. I think it's been an exhilarating experience. Just seeing from where I think all this started, and you were part of that as a Young India Fellowship graduate, to see where the university is. I think it's quite commendable actually.
Right. Your industry, whether it's what you do now or private equity, is something where I see a lot of people on network capital and otherwise just aspiring to break into it somehow. So the question to you is, if you were to give them some advice, what would it be? And when you hire, or when you hired at Chrys Capital, or now when you hire, what do you really look for?
So I would see, the advice I give every young person is, I think that you have to shape yourself in whatever you want to do, with obviously the education. That the first thing is to get that. Secondly is also, I know it's hard, and sometimes you might not find it, but to get really the internships, or at least, especially as an MBA student, to find internships in places where at least you are doing something which is similar to what you really want to do. And it might not be the absolute blue chip company that you want to work for, but at least it's in the same line. Sometimes people make the mistake of taking something which they really don't want to do, and then I think it just becomes very hard. Thirdly, obviously, there are not hundreds of jobs in this business, and not because of anything.
Why is that so?
Because these are small firms. Investment decisions are always taken by few people. So the pyramid is a much smaller pyramid, and like even if you see some of the biggest global funds, they have like maybe 300, 400, 500 people, versus if you see a multinational, they have hundreds of thousands of people.
Right,
so it's just the nature of the industry, and where and different industries obviously have different needs of people. So I would say, I think that's the first part. The second thing that we obviously look at, and I think we've done hiring both ways.
Both Mylen and Chrys?
Both Mylen and Chrys, and I would say we've done, the hiring pattern is pretty much the same. I would say young kids, very smart, who've been either overseas or in
When
India.
you say smart, do you mean quantitatively smart, or do you guys measure them holistically?
For me, and I think one of the advantages, and I'm so happy that Ashoka is getting done, and I see now kids who are much more well-grounded. In our business, if you don't have good communication skills, you'll be a failure, because once you're talking to an entrepreneur, how are you going to really get information, and how is he going to like you? Because we're not a back-end operation, you understand? We're not doing quantitative stuff, both in private and public equity actually. And if you don't have that skill, you might have the best analysis skill, which is okay, but really sometimes the answers are behind what it is, and how you engage with people, and and how you do things. So it's become much more important than people think. Also, I think the qualitative aspect of companies is becoming very important. The governance, who's the management, because really, if you define the best investments that a Chrys or a Mylen have done, the single biggest reason is the people behind those companies. And I can show you where we had the best analysis, the best valuation models, but because the managements were not up to the mark, things have not gone well. So
and you're candid in saying that it all wasn't smooth. You guys did make mistakes.
Yeah, we made some big mistakes, and even at Mylen we made mistakes. Obviously, if the mistakes are more, I think, driven out of analysis, I think they're well accepted. Obviously, if you made mistakes where you obviously back somebody who's had poor governance or has had issues other than that, then obviously there's a bigger problem, and luckily we've not had that. So this is an industry, you'll win some, lose some, but in India the challenge is that you have to win 80-85% of the times to make money, because really, other than venture,
high rate,
in our space, really to make 10 baggers and 5 baggers is gone. India has always been, I would say, a slightly expensive market in both private and public equity, and so your success ratio has to be high, and I would say that we continue to do the same thing.
So well-grounded people,
Yes.
strong communication skills with a broader understanding.
And I have a preference, and I just say that I like people who actually done things other than finance. So I look at if they've been debating, if they've had communication staff, have they worked in a place where they've had external contact, versus people who've had so because there are two kinds of jobs each firm has. There's a research kind of a job, and there's a front-end investment kind of a job. And so I think there are some people who are very well on the research side, but then they get stuck. And because the firms are much smaller, those functions in most firms are actually combined. I would say in the US you would have separate
in
functions.
your firms, they've
combined.
been combined?
So all the young people in our firm, including up to the director level, and that was true even in Chrys Capital, do both research, modeling, and meetings. So it's the same person, and I think that's a better model in India, because then you have the full
end-to-end picture.
So I think that's the other skill, and I think the fourth skill is, I think, just the ability for people to learn, because we always give a project. I always give a project. We did it even. I don't know what they do at Chrys now, but we always did it to a young. And I think that is more not to look at his analytical skills, because I would say 85-90% get it right. It's how they think about all of this, okay? Because to get the numeric stuff, I think they get it. Mm-hmm. If you don't get that, then then you're done. You understand what I'm saying? So the question is, it's like
once you beat that
it's
threshold.
like in GMAT, I'm saying, okay, if 700 is the threshold, most good kids will get 700 and above, and then you say, okay. So I'm saying in our cases, the analysis is, I think, the easier thing to find out actually.
Yeah, unnecessary but not sufficient.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's why there are less number of people. It's always harder to get in, and so I actually recommend to people that even when they're in college, when they're in MBA programs, I think they should look at opportunities where they can excel themselves, just not in their academic but other areas.
Right.
And I think, and also the other thing which we look at, and I think it's less to do, and I think that's where I felt very unhappy with Delhi University, and somehow is that there is no alumni really, there is no connect. When I now look at even a 5-year-old institution like Ashoka, I look at kids and say where they've come from, and is their alumni network good? Because I think that's another way of not mentoring in that way, but it's a very informal way of, I think, helping each other, competing, saying, people have done well, and I actually think that it's a very important and integral part of
right.
how you look at people. And I've generally seen children who have better network are actually better in our kind of business actually.
Right. Yeah, research shows actually typically connectors between networks, and they have a direct correlation with success. If you look at
because we all don't know everybody in the world, so you have to find that connect to get to know that.
Right.
And especially in my business, where you could take an investment decision tomorrow. Like for example, we own Yes Bank, and Yes Bank had a big QIP yesterday. I'm just giving you an example. Now, obviously, we owned it; it was okay, but I would have otherwise. Sometimes you just have 12 hours to figure out.
Right.
So one is, if you really don't know the business well, there's a problem. But secondly, if you can't find people who can give you all the answers, also a problem.
Got it. Moving on, how do you create learning opportunities for yourself?
So I would say personally, I think there are 3 things that I do. The first thing, obviously, is the first thing I do is actually, and I think that was a conscious decision to get myself attached to some of the educational initiatives, and Ashoka was one very big part of it, I think. The second is this whole technology stuff that I told you. I think I want to learn and be part of the young stuff, because 20 years ago when I was in college or school, it was happening, but it was not really happening. I think it also gives me an opportunity to meet a lot of young people, a lot of smart people. And so I would say that's, and the third thing is just traveling. I think when you travel around the world and you meet people from diverse industries, I think, and you learn about businesses in China and businesses in Latin America, or there are always learnings to take, and sometimes it might not be tangible to your work, but you really,
maybe not in the short term.
Yes. And fourth is, I'm part of this also excellent organization called YPO. So that is also a very
How is that big?
It's an excellent experience. I think you have everybody who's done well. It's a focused, driven organization on learning. Obviously, you have people who have been successful in different fields, and you can learn about different industries. You can talk. So it's like a very big network of CEOs around the world that you can tap.
Oh, it's a global network.
Yes, it's I think 12,000 CEOs around the world.
I see. So you mentioned technology. Again, this is not a question that I'll force you to answer, but India is a country that's experimenting with AI. New kinds of models are coming up in e-commerce. Technology seems to be, or it used to be, India's forte. Do you think that will be a competitive advantage going forward?
I think it has to be. Otherwise, so look at this whole digitization stuff. Whatever they are trying, whatever the government of the country is trying to do, without technology, it's not going to be. It would not be possible. Imagine without the telephone. Because the challenge in India still is that we're actually going to leapfrog many, because we didn't have, like, for example, PC and laptop penetration. We just bypass that. Similarly, I think on the network data side, I think you're going to bypass some of the stuff, and I think that will be India's biggest friend, and I think that's where I think people at the younger level have to be skilled. Actually, I think there'll be more opportunities in that space than I think in
despite the universities.
Yes.
Because on average the quality isn't high, and not just in many emerging markets.
I actually think that should become our competitive edge actually.
Yeah. And these startups that are coming to fore, like many of them aren't profitable. Do you see?
I think it's very hard, and I think you've seen. I think for people eventually, if you run successful businesses, let's take e-commerce also. You had a very big retail IPO of a company last week, which was a brick and mortar company, but it's done very well. You cannot now show these models over a period of time where I think you're burning a lot of money, because I think people are getting restless. So I think you will see a lot of failure, but you will also see some very big successes. And secondly, also, I think you will have to accept that in each space there will be the global giant that you'll have to compete with, whether it's Amazon, Uber, and I think they have the best practices, technology, and both have shown as they've entered the market, they have the really deep pockets to burn that kind of money. So and also India is a very price sensitive market in that way. It's different from other places. So I think it's going to be a lot of hard burn, and the hard burn will continue to be there. But eventually, I think you will see a few big players come out. But I think people have to figure out in their mind that technology is a big enabler, but it also is your biggest competition. So you can't say I'm Ola and say I'm not going to recognize Uber, or I'm Amazon. So you have to recognize global competition and fight with it. Yeah. And so I think it'll both create a lot of heartbreak, but also people who will win very big, I think.
Do you agree with the theory that venture capital industry in a way is not playing its part as well as it should in the startup story, in the sense that it's being a disincentive for people to actually figure out unit economics?
I think that's where I think personal capital and angel investing comes in, I think, in a much better way. I agree with you. And also, I'll tell you the challenge, and I agree with you with a lot of the VCs is, I think because India has really seen paper money made in venture. They've really not been, let's say, 10 big venture companies that have become big. I think that they're thinking more of them as growth investors, really, rather than venture and angel investors. Right. I actually don't really see most of those initial money coming from, maybe there'll be few, but really I think angel network of people who have made money and are now willing to say, okay, we'll give a little bit. I think the failure rate will be very high, but I think that's where I think a lot of the money will come, I think.
Because these days entrepreneurs, or at least some point in time, are worried about okay, there's money here, let's copy the model in the US. It's a proven model. Venture capital money will follow, and then we'll exit.
I don't think so. Maybe one or two few people will find it.
It's clearly not working.
Also, India is a very different market, and I think if anything, e-commerce is a clear space where you have now built some companies with great scale. But I don't know how many of them are really making money right now, honestly. But Amazon, is now starting to make money in the US, and it's just at a different scale. So I don't agree with that. I think India will have to figure out their own business models and their own their own edge and their own competitive advantage.
Right. Do you see a major consumer internet company coming out of India in the next decade?
I think it's a difficult question. I don't know.
I mean, what I'm alluding to is that do you think that the ecosystem, there are multiple views you hear on the Indian startup ecosystem. Like, there's availability of talent, the population is young, the government is supportive. But to build a consumer internet company, you need to think at a different level altogether.
See, the ecosystem is there. I'm just saying that I think you have to get a lot of stars aligned to get there. I'm less worried about the ecosystem. I'm more worried about just can people really go the whole hog and stay the whole length. But I don't worry about the ecosystem as much.
Right. So Gul, thank you very much for your time. This concludes part 1 of the interview. I really appreciate it. It will help a lot of people who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs, investors, and just looking to understand the industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much.